woman who tried to erase me from my daughter's life was about to learn that some men don't disappear just because you stop looking at them. She had already seated me at the wrong table, between a florist's assistant and someone from the catering company, while my daughter stood at the altar 20 feet away. But that was just the opening move. What happened when I tried to walk to my family's table? When her hands gripped the back of my chair and pulled, when the marble floor of the Grand Meridian ballroom came up to meet my 63-year-old back. That was the declaration of war. What she didn't know, what nobody in that glittering room knew yet, was that her own father was just then stepping through the doors at the far end of the hall. And the moment his eyes found mine, everything she had spent 2 years building was going to come apart. Have you ever watched someone try to make you disappear while you were still standing right in front of them? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. My daughter, Olivia, got married on a Saturday in September, which should have been one of the best days of my life. 31 years I raised that girl. Her mother, Susan, passed when Olivia was 4. A car accident on I-94 outside of Gary, Indiana, on a Tuesday morning when most of the world was just making coffee. I remember standing in the kitchen of our small house in Hammond holding a cartoon of orange juice I'd just pulled from the refrigerator and the phone ring and everything after that being a before and an after. I'm a retired electrician. Spent 32 years with Local 697 working commercial sites, hospitals, schools. I wasn't a rich man. I drove used trucks and bought my dress shirts from Kohl's and packed my lunch most days, but Olivia never went without. When her class went to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade, she went. When she needed braces, she got them. When she got into Indiana University, full-ride academic scholarship, which still makes my chest tight when I think about it, I drove her down to Bloomington myself and carried every box up 4 flights of stairs and then sat in my truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive home. She called every Sunday, without fail, even during finals. Even during the semester she was studying abroad in London. 11 p.m. her time, 6 p.m. mine, every Sunday. Then she met Brandon. She met him at a company happy hour, 2 years after graduation. He was in corporate finance. His family was from Winnetka, the kind of Winnetka where the houses don't have addresses on the mailbox because everyone who matters already knows where you live. His mother, Margaret, wore her hair in a perfect silver bob and shook my hand at our first dinner in a way that suggested she was performing the gesture rather than meaning it. His father, as it turned out, was traveling for work and wouldn't make the dinner. I would meet him at the wedding, Brandon said. They would have so much in common, Margaret added, with the particular smile of a woman who has never meant anything she said at a dinner table. The restaurant was a steakhouse in River North, the kind where the menu has no prices on the copy they hand to the guest of honor. I figured that out too late. The bill came to $340 and some change, and Margaret looked at her purse for a moment and then looked at me, and I understood. I put my card down. I had enough in checking to cover it. But I want you to understand, that was my grocery money for the next 3 weeks. I didn't say that. I signed the receipt and said it was a fine meal. Walking to the parking garage, Olivia fell into step beside me. You were quiet tonight, Dad. Just listening, I said. Learning about Brandon's world. She squeezed my arm. They'll warm up. Margaret's just protective. I didn't say what I was thinking. I've spent a lot of my life not saying what I'm thinking. And I'd learned that this is sometimes wisdom and sometimes cowardice, and the difference isn't always clear until later. 3 weeks before the wedding, Margaret came to my house. I live in the same house I lived in with Susan, a 3-bedroom brick bungalow in Hammond, with a detached garage and a yard that I keep clean even though it's just me. Margaret pulled up in her Lexus and sat in it for a moment before getting out. And I watched from the kitchen window and understood that she was seeing the neighborhood the way a tourist sees a place they have no intention of visiting again. She came inside because I asked her to. I offered her coffee. She held the mug without drinking from it. George, she said. That's my name, George Mallory. I want to talk to you about the future, about what's best for Olivia and Brandon as they start their life. All right, I said. When people build a new life together, they need space. room to grow into the people they're meant to become. She set the mug down. Brandon has an opportunity in the Chicago office that would move them into the city. A real fresh start. And I hope you'll understand this in the spirit it's intended. That fresh starts sometimes mean creating some healthy distance from the past. I looked at her. You're talking about me. She smiled. I'm talking about patterns, about the way families can sometimes hold their children back from their full potential. You've given Olivia a wonderful foundation. She paused the way people pause when they're about to contradict everything they just said. But the life she's stepping into requires a different kind of support. The kind that, honestly, George, might be better coming from people who understand that world. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, my neighbor Terence was mowing his lawn. I could hear it through the kitchen window. Margaret, I said, Olivia's mother died when she was 4 years old. I worked double shifts for 3 years so I could pay off the house and still put money in a college fund. I was at every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every single Sunday dinner. I have never asked my daughter for anything except to be happy. So when you talk to me about patterns and distance and healthy starts, I'd like you to be very plain about what you mean, because I'm not going to pretend I don't understand you. Something moved behind her eyes. Not regret, exactly. Something colder. The wedding is in 3 weeks, she said. After that, Brandon and Olivia begin their chapter. I'm simply asking you to be thoughtful about your role in it. She stood, straightened her jacket, and left. I heard her car back out of my driveway. Terence was still mowing. That night I sat with a photograph of Susan, the one from our wedding, where she's laughing at something off camera and her hair is doing exactly what she wanted it to do, and I talked to her the way I have been talking to her for 29 years. She wants to erase us, I told her. She looks at this house and sees everything she wants Brandon to leave behind. I paused. She might be right about some of it, but she's wrong about what matters. A week later, I had coffee with my old friend Ray Kowalski. Ray and I went through the apprenticeship program together back in 1984. He retired from the union 2 years before I did, and now does part-time security consulting. We met at a diner on Calumet Avenue that has been there since before either of us was born. Tell me about this woman, Ray said. So I did. The dinner, the handshake, the visit to my house, the $340 bill. Ray stirred his coffee slowly. George, you know what she's doing. I know what she's doing. And you know you can't fight it directly. You go to Olivia and say, your mother-in-law wants to cut you off from your father. Olivia has to choose between believing you and believing the family she's about to marry into. That's not a fight you win by fighting. So what do I do? You be exactly who you are, Ray said. You show up. You don't make scenes. You let her play her hand. He looked at me over the rim of his mug. People like Margaret, they're so used to winning they get careless when they think it's over. She'll make a mistake, or something will happen that she can't control. And if it doesn't, he was quiet for a moment. Then you'll still be Olivia's father. And that is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. I drove home along the lake. It was late September, already starting to feel like fall. I thought about what Ray had said. I thought about Olivia's voice on the phone every Sunday, and the way it had started sounding a little more careful, a little more managed, in the last several months, like she was editing herself before she spoke. The night before the wedding, she called at 11:30. I was already in bed, lying awake. Dad. Her voice was the voice she used when she was 12 and had broken a window playing catch and didn't know how to tell me, I'm here, sweetheart. Can I come over, right now? Brandon's at his bachelor thing. I need to sit in the kitchen. I need to sit in our kitchen for a little while. She arrived 20 minutes later in jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back, looking like a college kid who hadn't slept. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table we've had since she was small. The one with the burn mark on one corner from a candle she left lit in 2009. And I made tea. And for a while we didn't say much. Dad, am I making a mistake? The question landed between us like something dropped from a height. Do you love him? I asked. Yes, I do. I really do. She wrapped both hands around her mug. But lately I feel like I keep shrinking. Like there are things I can't talk about and places I'm not supposed to mention and feelings I'm supposed to have that I don't actually have. She looked up. She told me it would be better if we spent holidays with her family for the first few years, that it would help us build a foundation. And when I said I always spend Christmas with you, she said, her voice caught. She said that was a lovely habit, but that things change. I was very careful with the next thing I said. I have learned that a father's anger, however righteous, can do more damage than a mother-in-law's calculation. Olivia, do you remember when you graduated high school? What I said to you? She nodded. That the point of raising a child is to raise a person. And what does that mean to you? She was quiet. That I have to make my own choices. That's right. And I trust you to do that. What I want you to think about, tonight, before tomorrow, is whether the person you're being with Brandon is the person you actually want to be, not who anyone else wants you to become. Just, is this really you? She didn't answer right away. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. I don't know, she said finally. I love who I am when I'm with him. But I don't love who I become when I'm with his family. I didn't tell her what to do. I'm her father, not her warden. I hugged her at the door around midnight and told her whatever she decided, I would be there. That is what fathers do. The wedding was at St. Michael's in Lincoln Park, a beautiful church, old stone, stained glass that turns the afternoon light into something almost holy. I got there early and sat in a pew near the front, on the groom's side, because Olivia had no side. She had asked me to sit near the aisle so she could see me when she walked in. She walked in on her own. She had asked to. She said she wasn't something to be given away. When she came down that aisle in her grandmother's earrings and a dress she'd picked out without anyone's help, she looked at me and I nodded once and she stood a little straighter. That was our whole conversation. It was enough. The reception was at the Grand Meridian, which is the kind of venue that has a staff person whose only job is to stand near the floral arrangements and make sure no one touches them. I found my place card among the table assignments near the entrance. I expected table 3 or 4 near the family. The place card read, Table 11. George Mallory, between Hendricks Floral Design and Midwest Premier Catering. I stood there for a moment with the card in my hand. A young woman from the catering company saw my face. Are you Olivia's dad? She's talked about you so much. Before I could answer, Margaret appeared. She moved through rooms the way money moves, quietly and with the assumption that it belongs wherever it lands. George, there you are. Her smile was perfect. I see you found your seat. I think there's been a mix-up, I said quietly. This table is with the vendors. No mix-up. Her voice was warm and completely empty of warmth. I thought you'd be more comfortable here. More at home, with people who know what it means to work for a living. The phrase was surgical. It was designed to sound like a compliment while landing like a slap. Margaret, I said, keeping my voice even, I'd like to sit with my daughter's family. Your daughter's family is at table 1. She tilted her head. You're something a little different. I looked across the room. Table 4 had an empty seat, a chair with no place card, just space. Olivia's cousin was already seated there, waving at me. I'll be sitting over there, I said, and began moving toward the family section. That was when it happened. I had crossed about half the distance. My hand was reaching for the back of the empty chair. Olivia's cousin was already sliding over to make room. Margaret moved fast for a woman in heels. I'll give her that. She got to the chair before I did and pulled it back, not all the way, just enough, and at exactly the wrong moment, so that when I started to sit, there was nothing under me. I went down hard. The marble floor of the Grand Meridian ballroom doesn't forgive. My left hip took most of it, then my elbow and the sound. The sound carried across the room the way sounds do in places built for acoustics. The string quartet stopped mid-phrase. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. 200 people turned to look at the old man on the floor. I lay there for a moment and let the pain settle into something I could measure. Margaret stood above me, her expression composed into something between concern and amusement. "George," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Are you all right? You really should have stayed at your table. I think the excitement was too much." There was scattered, uncomfortable laughter. Some people looked away. Some leaned toward each other and whispered. I got up the way I've been getting up for 63 years, one piece at a time, without hurry, with whatever dignity I could locate. My hip throbbed. I straightened my jacket. I am a union electrician from Hammond, Indiana. I have fallen off scaffolding and I have gotten back up. Brandon appeared at my elbow, his face the color of chalk. "George, what happened? Are you okay?" "Just tripped," I said. I didn't want to be the reason this day went sideways. Not yet. Not like this. Not like this. "I'm fine, Brandon." Margaret touched his arm. "Your father-in-law had a little stumble. I'm sure he's fine. Let's get everyone back to." That was when I heard the doors at the far end of the ballroom open. Not the service entrance, the main doors. They opened with a weight to them, the kind of doors that announce whoever comes through them, whether they mean to be announced or not. The man who walked in wore a dark suit and carried himself the way former military men carry themselves when they've been out long enough to forget they're doing it. Silver hair. Late 60s. A face I hadn't seen in over 20 years, but faces like that don't leave you. His eyes moved across the room with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to assess a situation. They took in Margaret. They took in Brandon. They slid past the assembled tables and the stopped string quartet and landed on me, sitting half on the floor with my jacket askew and my hip radiating. He stopped walking. "My God," he said. His voice cut through the resumed murmur of the room and silenced it again. "George Mallory." The name rang off the marble and the chandeliers and the stopped wine glasses and 300 and some odd years of assembled wedding guests. I recognized him then. Older, grayer, but undeniable. Thomas Alderman. Colonel Thomas Alderman. Retired. Margaret's husband. Retired. Margaret's husband. Brandon's father. The man who had been on a business trip the night of that expensive dinner in River North. I knew him from a February in 2001 in a place most people in that ballroom had probably never thought about. I was part of a civilian electrical crew contracted to do infrastructure work at a forward operating base in Afghanistan, pre-surge, before most of the country understood what was happening there. Thomas was a captain then. One night a generator fire got out of hand and the structure where he and 2 other soldiers were sleeping went up fast. Everyone else ran. I was closer to the door. I got 2 of them out. Thomas was the second. He was unconscious and heavier than he looked, and I dragged him 30 feet through smoke and heat and into cold air and let the medics take him, and then sat against a concrete barrier for a long time trying to remember how to breathe. I never told anyone about it. You do what you do and then you go home. Thomas walked through the crowd of his son's wedding guests and he didn't stop until he was standing in front of me. And then he put both hands on my shoulders and looked at me the way men look at each other when words are insufficient but they use them anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his voice was the voice of a man who had commanded rooms larger than this, "I need you to understand something about the man who just got up off this floor." The room was absolutely still. "His name is George Mallory. He is Olivia's father. And 23 years ago in Afghanistan, during a fire that most of you will never read about in any newspaper, this man ran into a burning building and dragged me out when everyone else had reason to leave. Thomas's voice tightened. I owe him my life. I owe him the fact that I was alive to walk my son down the aisle today. I owe him everything. I heard a sound across the room and turned. It was Olivia. She was standing at the edge of the dance floor with her hand over her mouth and tears doing what tears do, regardless of mascara or special occasion. Thomas turned to look at his wife. Margaret's face had done something I hadn't thought it capable of. It had gone uncertain. The architecture of her composure was still present, but something beneath it had shifted, like a building whose foundation has moved an inch. She put him at the vendor table. Someone near the front said, I don't know who. But the words carried, Margaret. Thomas's voice was quiet now, which was somehow more authoritative than when it was loud. What table did you assign George? The silence was its own answer. Brandon looked at his mother. Something was happening in his face. A reckoning, a series of small realizations falling into place like locks opening. He looked at me. He looked at Olivia. Mom, he said. Did you move his place card? Brandon, this isn't the... Did you pull the chair? The silence stretched. Olivia crossed the floor. She didn't run. She walked the way she walked when she was certain of something, and she came to stand beside me and took my arm. And I felt her hand on my sleeve and thought about a 4-year-old who used to fall asleep holding my finger. Dad, she said, I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for, I told her. I should have seen it. I should have. You saw it when you needed to. That's what matters. Brandon was still looking at his mother. We talked about this. I told you he was important to Olivia. I told you. I was protecting you, Margaret said. Her voice was still controlled, but the temperature of it had dropped. Everything I did was to protect what you were building. You tried to make her father disappear at her own wedding, Brandon said. That's not protection. That's... He stopped, looked at the floor. That's what you do. Thomas put his hand on Brandon's shoulder. Then he turned to me. George, he said, I am sorry. For tonight and for whatever came before tonight that I wasn't here to see. He looked around the room. Where would you like to sit? I almost laughed. After all of it, the question was so simple. Next to my daughter, I said. That's where I sat. Table 1. The chair that had been intended for Thomas before his delayed flight caught up to him. Olivia on my left, Brandon on my right, Thomas across from me, and between us a dinner that got cold because we were too busy talking to eat it. Talking the way families talk, when the pretense has been stripped away and what's left is just people trying to understand each other. Margaret sat at the table. She was quiet for most of the meal. Toward the end, she looked at me across the centerpiece and said, I misjudged you. She didn't apologize. Maybe that was the most honest thing she'd said all evening. A lot of people do, I said. It's all right. It wasn't entirely all right. But some things take time. Olivia danced with me twice. The second time was to a Patsy Cline song that had been her mother's favorite, and I don't know how Olivia knew to request it, but she did, and we moved around the edge of the dance floor in the way that people dance when dancing isn't about dancing. Did you really carry him out of a burning building? She asked. He was heavier than he looked, I said. She laughed. It was Susan's laugh, the one from the photograph, surprised and real. You never told me. It didn't seem like something to carry around, I said. You do what you have to do and then you get back to living. The evening wound down the way good evenings do, slowly, with people reluctant to let it end. Brandon found me near the coat check and shook my hand with both of his, which is how men shake hands when words aren't quite adequate. I know this isn't what you'd have chosen, he said, for your first impression of my family. Brandon, I said, I raised a daughter who knew to come home the night before her wedding when she needed to think clearly. That tells me everything I need to know about who she chose." He nodded. There was more in that nod than either of us needed to say. Thomas walked out with me at the end of the night. We stood under the awning of the Grand Meridian while the valet brought my truck around. The same make and model I've driven for 9 years. Considerably less impressive than anything else in that parking queue, and the fall air came off the lake and reminded us both that seasons change whether or not you're ready. "I thought about you," Thomas said. "Over the years, tried to find you once through the contractor records and couldn't." "I moved twice," I said, "and I'm not hard to find if you know where to look. Hammond's not that big." "I'll know where to look now." He paused. "I owe you something I can never actually repay." "You don't owe me anything," I said. And I meant it. You raised a son who chose a woman who knew how to walk down an aisle on her own. That's not nothing. My truck pulled up. I shook his hand and got in and drove south on Lakeshore Drive toward the Skyway, past the lights of the harbor and the dark water beyond them. Past neighborhoods I've known my whole life. Back toward the small brick house in Hammond where Susan's photograph sits on the dresser and the kitchen table still has a burn mark from a candle left lit in 2009. I sat at that table for a while after I got home, the way I do. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. Some men, when life tries to erase them, disappear quietly. They accept the smaller table and the empty chair and the polite dismissal, and they tell themselves it doesn't matter. I understand those men. I've been close to being one of them. But Susan didn't raise Olivia alone. I was there every Sunday, every school play, every box up 4 flights of stairs, and the work a person does in the quiet years, the unglamorous, unwitnessed, unremarkable work of simply showing up. That work doesn't vanish because someone decides it's inconvenient. It doesn't disappear because a woman in a Lexus decides you don't belong in the same room as her chandelier. It lives in the way your daughter stands a little straighter when she sees you in the pew. It lives in the laugh she inherited from her mother. It lives in every Sunday phone call and every cup of tea at midnight and every moment she chose to come home when she needed to think. I got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. The next morning, Olivia called at 9 a.m. Not 11, not Sunday, just 9 on a Monday morning, which hadn't happened in years. "Dad," she said, "are you up?" "I'm up." "Good." A pause. "Brand and I were talking. We want Christmas here, in Hammond, at the table with the burn mark." I didn't say anything for a moment. "The turkey's going to take some planning," I finally said. She laughed. It was her mother's laugh. It always will be. "We've got time," she said.